Hi, and welcome to another episode of Joy Recovery Radio. Glad that you've joined us today. Today, we're going to talk about acting out versus acting in, and we're going to focus on acting in. That might be a new concept for some of you. And in order to put a context around this subject of acting in, we want to begin with some work from Donald Nathanson, a psychologist who came up with the concept of the 4 poles of shame. So let's start with the center or core of shame before we look at the 4 poles. The 4 poles of shame are 4 ways that we tend to move and act and respond to shame in our life. But let's look at what the core, the 3 I's of shame are. When we look at shame, it's usually a core wound that we experienced in our childhood, especially between ages 6 and 16, or formative years. And it's around what we call the 3 I's: insignificance, incompetence, or impotence. And let me just briefly elaborate on what those 3 are. Insignificance is basically the issue of, do I matter? It's when I feel not enough, inadequate, small, invisible, not heard, not validated, not seen, not honored. The second concept of shame is incompetence. This is where I feel like I can't do anything right. No matter how hard I try, it's not enough. I am a failure. I'm incompetent in this area. And then the third I is impotence. And what we mean by this is this feeling of powerlessness, this double bind where I have no choice. It's hopeless. I can't fix this. It's hopelessness. It's helplessness. It's despair. I don't have the personal power it takes to affect change. I'm hopeless, helpless, powerless. I'm impotent. So anytime we are dealing with one of the 3 I's, we're dealing with shame. And most of us, when it comes to our sex addiction, it is predated by one, if not all 3 of these core wounds that, according to Dr. Carnes, basically set up an entire shame-based belief system, how we saw ourselves and how we saw the world and how we saw our value. And that shame-based belief system led to the compulsive sexual behavior. And so even though we may not be acting out anymore with our deceptive or compulsive sexuality, we may still be dealing with the 3 I's of shame that they've never been addressed. So we'll still have moments where we feel insignificant, or we feel incompetent, or we feel impotent, or more than one of those. And those still show up for us, and we still have to process them. Now, Donald Nathanson comes along and he does his research on shame, and he says what he calls the compass of shame, the 4 poles of shame. That when you look at people, when they don't process their shame, instead they react, they usually move in one of 4 directions. So the very first direction, we avoid. And this is where we decide that I don't agree with the message of shame, and I'm going to prove that it's wrong. I'm going to avoid it. I'm going to ignore it. I'm going to pretend it's not there. And this is acting out. This is avoiding shame temporarily by acting out. This is also medicating. So we act out as a way of dealing with the shame, but that reinforces the shame. The second pole that he talks about in response to our core toxic shame is attacking others. This is where we feel like not only do we feel one of the 3 I's, but we perceive that someone else also believes one of the 3 I's about us, and we attack them for it. So we try to bring them down to the level where we feel ourselves. So they may or may not be articulating that particular belief about us, but we perceive them to be, and we attack them for it. We perceive that they hate what we also hate about ourselves. What we loathe about ourselves, they loathe. And so we react by attacking them. The third pole in the compass of shame that Nathanson talks about is we attack ourselves. And you've probably seen someone that's in the midst of shame. They'll have negative self-talk, and they'll actually articulate it out loud. It's like, I'm such an a-hole. I'm such a loser. I'm such a failure. I can't do anything right. And a lot of times, not every time, but a lot of times, when a person actually vocalizes this out loud so that others will hear, it's in the hope that they will be rescued, that whoever is listening will contradict what their self-talk is out loud. And so they're hoping that someone will negate or disagree the message that they're saying about themselves. So they attack themselves in hope, often, for someone to validate them from myself. And then the fourth pole on the compass of shame is hiding. And that's different from avoiding. Avoiding is I don't agree with the message of shame, and I'm going to either soothe myself or I'm going to achieve in such a way that I prove that it's wrong. That's avoidance. Many addictive behaviors are a part of avoiding shame, but they end up multiplying the shame, and the shame comes back into the system stronger than ever. Hiding is where I agree with the message, and I am going to keep everyone at a safe distance. I am going to have a barrier around me where I keep God and others, and really even myself, far apart from me. So we go into hiding and we distance ourselves from others. That's the paradox of shame when we respond with this particular pull in the compass, is what shame needs in order to be healed is attachment. We need relationship. We need intimacy. And that is the antidote for shame. But the paradox is shame whispers in our ear to withdraw from everyone, to hide, to have a covering where we have a barrier between us and other people. So the very thing that we need in order to remedy shame is the last thing we pursue when we move towards this pull. So when we look at these pulls, another way to look at them is when it comes to shame and the three I's, if we condense it down to very simple terms, we either act out or medicate, we lash out at ourselves or others, or we act in. Today, we're going to hone in on acting in. What is that particular response to shame? And what do we do about it? So acting in, let's go ahead and explore what do we mean by that. Let me start with the definition. Acting in is just another way of describing avoiding intimacy, intimacy avoidance. In other words, it's a form of self-protection that keeps your partner and really everyone at a distance, preventing them from getting close to your heart and avoiding genuine intimacy and connection with others. So it's a self-defense mechanism. We're acting in, we're not acting out, we're not medicating our shame, we're not avoiding our shame. Instead, we're embracing the shame and we're going to act in. We're going to constrict. We're going to withdraw. We're going to move inwards and isolate ourselves from everyone. Another way to look at acting in is, if you're familiar with the Manwala model, he's got 47 different, what he calls IAD behaviors, integrity, abuse, disorder behaviors. These are abusive behaviors that harm our partner. All 47 of these are basically acting in. It's intimacy avoidance. So we're no longer acting out, but now we're acting in. We had a false sense of intimacy when we were acting out. We were trying to meet legitimate needs in illegitimate ways by acting out. Now we act in. We keep everyone at a distance. We hurt our partners when we do this. This is abusive. This is harmful. This is a cycle of destruction. This does an incredible amount of damage. It's as if we took our heart, the core of who we are, and we hung a do not disturb sign on it, where we don't want anyone to come inside, to see who we really are, and to be close to us. And when we have this kind of barrier, here's the reality. We are preventing others from hurting us. We're also preventing others from helping us. And a lot of times when we go into this acting in phase, we begin to see others as the enemy, and we see them as a threat to us. And we just want to withdraw from God, self, others, and just wallow in our shame. Another way to just visualize this is a total NFL or Heisman stiff arm, where we're just keeping everyone 5 feet away. We don't want anyone close to us. This is intimacy avoidance. This is acting in. Why do we do this? If the remedy for shame is intimacy, why do we avoid the very thing that's going to help heal our shame? There's two main reasons, and one we've already talked about, and that is shame. That shame is a social emotion. We don't develop shame on our own. It's developed because we perceive someone else that was a influential attachment in our life, in our childhood. We perceive them to say one of these three I's to us. We perceived that they felt like we were insignificant, or we were incompetent in some way, or we were impotent. We felt stuck. We felt powerless. And typically we've experienced all three. And these are core wounds that when they're not dealt with, we carry them into adulthood, and they still influence us today. And so why do we act in? We're still impacted and affected and infected by shame. It's chronic, it's toxic, it's a state of mind, and we still have the same belief system that led to our acting out. Now it leads to acting in, and we haven't addressed the belief system. We still wrestle in a chronic way with these three I's in our life. Another way to look at this is shame began because of an attachment. We are driven by attachment. We come out of the womb wanting to connect with others. It's the way we're wired. It's the way God made us. We are driven to attach to others. However, in those attachments, we are damaged. That's where shame and other unpleasant state of minds come from, is from attachments. Someone, somehow, some way communicated to us a shameful thought. We embraced it, we perpetuated it on our own, but it began in an attachment. So we are driven by attachment, we are damaged by attachment, and thirdly, we are healed by attachment. The way we heal shame is in the same arena that it originated, and that is in an attachment. Ironically, though, and the paradox of this is when we are in shame, we avoid attachments. That's intimacy avoidance. That's acting in. There's a second primary reason that we act in, and that is because of resentments in our life. And I'm not going to belabor this point. I would point you to episode 5, where we really took a deep dive into resentments. But just for summary purposes, when it comes to resentment, what we're talking about is often when we're feeling shame, we project that onto our partner or to someone else. If we perceive that they are echoing what we already feel about ourselves, if we perceive that they are in alignment with that they see us the way we see ourselves, we lash out. We have resentment. We resent them for hating what we hate about ourselves. When it comes to resentment, often it's either because of projection, or it could be because we have these felt needs. Our partner didn't meet those needs, and now we resent them for it. Or we had these expectations of them, and they didn't meet our expectations, and now we resent them for it. Or we had these rules of engagement, that the way you relate to me has to be this way. You don't raise your voice to me. You don't disrespect me. You don't abandon me. You don't do these things. These are absolutes. These are irrational relationship rules that I implicitly, sometimes unconsciously, have for you. And when you violate those rules, then I resent you for it. So two of the main reasons that we act in, that we avoid intimacy with God, self, and others, is because of our shame, but also because of our resentment. And shame is really just resentment that's turned inward. We resent ourselves for some of the things that we've done or things that were done to us. So that's some of the main reasons why we act in. Let's talk about how, the techniques. And what I'm going to list are 8 primary ways that we addicts act in. This is not an exhaustive list. If you look at Manuela's model, there's 47 different ways that we act in, that we avoid intimacy, that we give our partners the stiff arm, that we either lash out or act in when it comes to dealing with our shame. But we're going to look at some of the most common 8 acting in techniques in particular. The first one is stonewalling. This is where you are stoic, you are a stone, you are non-expressive, you are non-emotive, you're non-responsive, you refuse to engage, you shut down. And sometimes stonewalling is controlling the conversation by saying things like, I guess we're just going to have to agree to disagree. And in essence, we're controlling and stopping the conversation, that there's no more input that's going to be offered by us. So stonewalling is a way of keeping our partners at a distance. It's intimacy avoidance. It's acting in. Another one is controlling with anger. And yes, this could be lashing out, but let's go ahead and include it as a way to avoid intimacy, as a way of acting in. That we control our partners and keep them at a distance with anger. This could be yelling, raising the volume of our voice. This could be aggressive demonstrations of slamming the door or hitting the wall or throwing something. This could be our tone, as far as being harsh or a biting tone. This could be cutting words that we say. We know our partners well, and because we know them well, we also know how to hurt them with surgical precision. We know how to really inflict pain on them. So we use words, we use demonstrations of aggressiveness and anger to control our partners and to keep them at a distance. And sometimes we will make these jabs so that we can go hide, so that we can avoid. Another way that we act in is with passivity. And this is where we're slow to do the recovery work. We stall to do a disclosure. We make our partners wait and wait and wait, pretty much being held hostage, waiting for us to complete our work. We don't take the initiative. We're more reactive. We're not proactive. This is the situation where a betrayed partner feels like he doesn't do anything unless I really get on his case. Otherwise, he's just passive. And he's always making excuses why he couldn't do this, why he couldn't make it to this meeting, why we're still waiting on disclosure, why he hasn't done recovery work lately, and why he hasn't done step work, and why he's not meeting with his CSAT or his sponsor anymore. So passivity, it's just another way of avoiding intimacy. Another one that we use to act in is by withholding love. And this can be especially if we are well aware of the primary love language of our partner, and we decide we're not going to show them love in that way. And it's a way of avoiding intimacy. For example, for Jacqueline, my partner, one of her primary love languages is acts of service. She feels loved when I serve her. And so one of the things that I do on a daily basis is I make her coffee in the morning. I get the kids dressed and ready for school. I take care of the trash. I take care of cleaning the kitchen. I do the laundry for the kids, acts of service that really helps her feel loved. And then she's got a whole set of household tasks that she does too. But these are specific ways that when I take things off of her plate and demonstrate practical love through acts of service, it fills her cup and she feels loved. If I'm acting in, if I'm wanting to hurt her in some way, or if I'm wanting to just avoid intimacy with her, then I can intentionally withhold a specific kind of love that is meaningful to her. I'm not going to make your coffee anymore. I'm not going to do any of these household tasks anymore. I'm going to put them back on you. That's a form of acting in. Or if your partner, their love language is words of affirmation, you refuse to compliment them. You refuse to encourage them. You refuse to show gratitude or say positive things to them. If your partner's primary love language is affection, this would be withholding affection. This could mean, if you are sexually intimate together, withholding sexual intimacy. So withholding specific expressions of love as a way of avoiding intimacy and as a way of hurting our partner. Another way that we act in is through blame. In one way or another, we either blame our partner or we blame someone else, and we don't take ownership. So it's not my fault. It's because this happened to me, or this was done to me, or it's this person's fault, or it's this circumstance, and it's just blame shifting. And what Dr. Skinner has found, and that this stat just absolutely blows my mind, but it's probably pretty accurate. He has found in his own research, interviewing over 1,300 couples recovering from sex addiction, that after the day of discovery, 90% of addicts, in one way or the other, as a way of coping with that shame, blamed their partner for their addictive behavior. 90%. They're not taking ownership. Or they're blaming someone else. Well, she came on to me, and that's why we had that one night stand, or I was drunk. That's why I had that one night stand, or I had this affair because she seduced me. It's her fault. It's blaming others. It's not taking ownership. It's an act of pride. And it avoids intimacy. It avoids transparency. It's acting in. So another one that we do is shame. And this is not shame that we're carrying. This is shame as far as attacking our partner. We shame our partner. And it's another way of acting in. So I'm not talking about a shame spiral that we feel personally. What I'm talking about is, right now, in my shame, I feel less than. So let me shame you and bring you down to my level so that I feel better about myself. So we'll say and do things that are really hurtful and shaming, attacking their character or their behavior in some way, because we perceive them as better than us, as higher than us. And so if we can bring them down to our level, then we feel more equal. We feel better about ourselves. So we shame our partner. We devalue them because we feel devalued. And this is intimacy avoidance. This is acting in. Another way that we act in is simply by avoidance. And this is avoiding difficult conversations, avoiding potential conflict. We can also avoid our partners by just being extremely busy. Work becomes our new mistress, and it's our way of avoiding our partners. We put in overtime, or now we got this new hobby that we're spending a lot of our free time doing. It's a way of avoiding our partners. Or just avoiding difficult conversations, like there's a woman that is tempting or triggering for you, and you see it and your partner sees it, but you don't address it. You don't speak to it. You just remain silent, and you avoid that difficult, uncomfortable dynamic of processing it with your partner. Recently, Jacqueline and I went to a shopping center, and we're in the parking lot, and I'm driving, and it's pretty crowded. And so I'm having to try to find a place to park, and I'm having to go down several lanes in the parking lot to find a parking spot. As I'm driving down one of the lanes, I can see in a distance a woman, and I can't see her very well, but I can tell that there's a potential temptation there, that she appears to be from a distance wearing shorts. And so there is no way to avoid crossing her. We're driving this way. She's walking this way. She's getting closer and closer. And so I look away and I tell Jacqueline, I acknowledge there is a person up ahead. I saw them from a distance. They're potentially tempting for me, triggering for you. I just want you to know that I'm staring at this corner of the hood, and I'm not going to look away while we slowly pass down. And I'm not going to look at them. And so it's awkward. It's uncomfortable, but it's not avoidance. It's not avoiding the difficult dynamic of the elephant in the room. She knows that there's a potential threat. I know there's a potential threat. Let's be proactive. Let's address it, and let's have our safety plan. So avoidance is another way that we act in, that we avoid intimacy with our partner. The final one we're going to look at today is criticism. And this is where it's usually something that's unfounded, but we're intentionally trying to say some kind of damaging comment to our partners about them, what we call tit for tat. You criticize this about me, I criticize this about you. And it's very juvenile. It's very childish. but it's a way of being critical and finding the faults in our partners and magnifying those faults. And of course, that avoids intimacy. So these are 8 different ways that we see quite commonly among the men when it comes to acting in as opposed to acting out. And the guys that are consistently acting in and avoiding intimacy, they're stuck. And they can be stuck for years. And their coupleship is stuck and their partner is stuck. Keep in mind, they're not acting out, but they're acting in. They had false intimacy when they were acting out. Now they're avoiding intimacy by acting in. And their partner's suffocating. They're just dying a slow, lonely death. And in fact, it's not accurate to say that you're stuck. It's more like you're actually going the opposite direction of intimacy. So you're not even making progress towards building a coupleship of intimacy, but you're evoking this unnecessary pain that shouldn't be happening on your partner. They've already experienced the incredible pain of D-Day, of discovery or disclosure of your deceptive, compulsive sexuality. And so they're picking up the fragments from that. But now, by avoiding intimacy, by acting in, it's causing further, additional, unnecessary pain and damage to your partner and to the coupleship. It's been said that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's intimacy. And so in a very real way, even though we're not technically acting out, it feels like to our partner, when we are intimacy avoidant, when we are acting in, it feels like we're acting out. Because both were various ways of not being known and seen and intimate with them. And so in a very real way, it still feels like they're in active addiction, even though they're not technically acting out. They're still so distant from me, and I don't know their heart, and I can't penetrate, and I can't get close to them. So with each of these 8, there are what we call counterbalances. There are opposing virtues that we want to move away from acting in, and we want to move towards intimacy. And so if we look at those for just a moment, one of the counterbalances of stonewalling our partner would be to be empathic, to be expressive, to be responsive, to actually show our emotions and share our emotions in a healthy, regulated way. A counterbalance to controlling our partners with anger would be to be gentle, to be tender with them. One of my commitments to Jacqueline is, I will not speak to you harshly. I will not act aggressively. I'll be tender with you. This is moving towards intimacy and away from acting in. Passive, the counterbalance of being passive, would be to be action-oriented, to be proactive, to take the initiative. The counterbalance to withholding love would not just be expressing love, but expressing unconditional love. Meaning, I am going to express love to you, especially your primary love language, without any strings attached, without any conditions that if you meet my needs, then I'll meet your needs. If you express my preferred love language, then I'll express your preferred love language. If you love me, then I'll love you. There's no if-then statement. There's no conditions. There's no strings. I will unconditionally love you because I did not when I was acting out. And I'm still not when I'm acting in. But I'm going to move away from that. I'm going to move towards intimacy, and I'm going to love you regardless of your response to me. Regardless of whether you meet my needs or make me a priority, I'm going to make you a priority, and I'm going to meet your needs, and I'm going to put you first. That's unconditional love. We can move away from acting in with blaming our partner and blaming others to taking ownership for our part in whatever the behavior is and being humble enough to own it and admit it. We can move away from shaming our partner, and the opposite of shame is honor. We can move away from avoidance, and especially avoiding the difficult conversations, and instead we can move towards the intimate behavior of engaging our partner. The courage. We can demonstrate the courage to have the difficult conversations. And finally, we can move away from criticism to gratitude, to praise, to focusing on all the amazing, wonderful, good qualities that we admire about. The last thing I want to talk about is the simple fact that we addicts can weaponize just about anything, including these acting and behaviors. And so what often happens with many of the men that I work with is that they will take some of these acting and behaviors and they will accuse their partners of being intimacy avoidant because they see similarities in some of their behavior. So I want to debunk that and unpack that for a moment. So for example, the first one, stonewalling. If the partner is in the middle of a painful conversation with you and she calls a timeout because she's feeling overwhelmed and she's reached her capacity and she's flooded and she can't take it anymore. So she needs a timeout, she needs distance, and she needs a break, and she doesn't want to have the conversation anymore. We can look at that and we can say, see, she's stonewalling, she's avoiding intimacy. When actually what's really happening is she's seeing that this is not helpful, this is not productive for her healing, or she's afraid of your abusive behavior. Either way, she's wanting to be safe and she's wanting to practice self-care. And so she's calling a timeout for her own safety to meet her own needs. That's actually a very healthy thing to do. She's not stonewalling. Sometimes we accuse her of controlling with anger. If she gets triggered or she gets flooded or she starts throwing F-bombs or she starts yelling or she starts throwing things or something like that, she isn't trying to control us with anger. She's having a legitimate trauma response because she's asking you to be a safe container and she doesn't feel safe at that moment. I love what Dr. William Clark says. A betrayed partner needs three things in order to heal. She needs every emotion expressed. She needs every question answered honestly. And she needs every possible motive for why you did what you did explored. And she needs all three of these done consistently and safely in order for her to heal. Some couples will get stuck in what I call a shame loop, where he neglects her. That makes her feel lonely, rejected. She responds in some kind of angry way. That makes him feel disrespected, and he responds by neglecting her anymore. And now they're in this cul-de-sac that they just keep driving in circles over and over and over again in this vicious cycle, in this shame loop. Another one that we often accuse our partners of being intimacy avoidant themselves is with their passivity. We don't feel like they're doing enough for their recovery, or they're not seeing their therapist anymore. Or they may actually take an approach where they're going to step away and they're going to observe our recovery for a while to see if it's actually genuine. This is a normative, healthy thing for partners to do. They are observing you and gathering information so that they can make a decision about their future. She's not being passive. She knows this is your work to do, and she's grounded and she's secure, and she's not going to take ownership for your work, and she's not going to push you to do your work. She is holding out to see what you do, and it will inform her on what her next move is going to be. That's actually a very healthy thing to do. It's not passivity. It's not intimacy avoidance. She's seeing, does he have a change of heart? Do I want to have a future with this person? Sometimes we'll accuse them of withholding love. Well, she won't say I love you anymore, or she won't wear her wedding ring anymore, or she won't change clothes in front of me, or we have separate beds now, or she's asked for a period of abstinence in our relationship. And so we accuse her of withholding love and not meeting our needs, and she's being intimacy avoidant. When actually she's not withholding love. Oftentimes what partners are doing is they're saying that what we had in the past was not genuine and it was dysfunctional. And we've got to completely build a brand new relationship and a brand new perspective on intimacy and sex and our coupleship because it was broken. And so we need to completely rewire what we thought we had. And sometimes she may not want to say, I love you, because you threw those words around with other people. And sometimes she may not want to say, I love you, because she's waiting until it's coming from a place of authenticity and genuineness because she doesn't know you. She thought she did. Now she realizes she doesn't. And you're still not being intimate with her. You still have that do not disturb sign on your heart. And so she hasn't been able to get to know you and have that emotional intimacy. And when she does say, I love you, she wants it to be from an authentic place. So we should honor that. We shouldn't accuse her of being intimacy avoidant. She's actually inviting you into intimacy so that she can say those words from a place of authenticity. Sometimes we accuse our partners of acting in by blaming us. She may say some things like, we would not be here in this position right now if it wasn't for what you did. That's not blaming you. That's accurate. That's the truth. You wouldn't be in this position right now if it wasn't for the choices that we made. So it's not intimacy avoidant. It's actually quite the opposite. It's inviting us into intimacy. It's inviting us into her pain. So it's not blame, it's pain. And she's expressing that. And she's inviting us to be a safe container for that. Sometimes we accuse her of shaming us. In the midst of her pain and trigger response, she may say things like, you're a monster. And what she's doing is she's not avoiding intimacy, but she is picking up the pieces of fragments that were destroyed by decades of a reality that she thought she had that is no longer true. She's not shaming you, but she is having a trauma response. And I know some men will bristle at this and they feel like this is unfair. She gets this hall pass. She gets to do these 8 behaviors towards me, and it's called trauma or healthy. But if I do them to her, I'm called intimacy avoidant. Well, here's the dynamic that's necessary in early recovery. There is, by nature, by necessity, disequilibrium in the relationship. Because in your act of addiction, you had control. You had power. You were playing God, and you were controlling her reality. You were controlling the information that she knew, and she was a pawn in your game. And so if we want her to heal, we've got to transfer that power and that locus of control over to her. And we have to willingly restrict our freedoms, our rights, our preferences, our power, because we abused it. And if we want her to heal, we don't need to look at that from a place of resentment. We need to look at that as necessary for her healing. We damaged her trust in us at her expense. We rebuilt her trust in us at our expense. So we sacrifice our preferences, our freedoms, our desires, our liberties, our rights temporarily for a season, however long it takes, so that she can heal. And she needs some agency that she has back in her life because everything feels out of control. Sometimes we will accuse our partners of avoidance. Maybe she doesn't want to do check-ins. She doesn't feel safe, or she doesn't feel like she can be vulnerable right now. She wants you to do check-ins, but she doesn't. She opts out. And we can look at that as she's being intimacy avoidant. But actually, she has boundaries. She's practicing self-care. She's inviting us to share our heart with her. And the more we do that, the safer she's going to feel to reciprocate that and to share her heart. Finally, we may see her criticism as a way of avoiding intimacy. Perhaps she'll say things like, why can't you be empathic? Why can't you be supportive? Why can't you be safe? Why do you keep harming me? That's not criticism. She's letting you know what she needs in order to heal. She's actually giving us a gift. She's saying, I don't feel seen. I don't feel heard. I don't feel valued. I don't feel validated. And that is helpful, accurate feedback. So we need to move away from these acting in behaviors and towards leaning in with the counterbalances of these behaviors. And we need to recognize that when we think we see these same behaviors in our partner, we have to understand that they are the victim in the relationship, that they're the one who has been traumatized. And that is often projecting onto our partner and assuming that they're avoiding intimacy when actually they're trying to rebuild their life and rebuild the coupleship so that in the future we can have an authentic, intimate relationship because they've discovered it was never there. So what I want to challenge you to do as we close this episode talking about acting in is really getting into the heart of empathy. And this is the closing challenge for you. A lot of times when we project onto our partners and when we're avoiding intimacy and we're holding on to shame and we're resenting them for various things, it's because we have a certain state of mind. And the state of mind is this. We are focusing on her behavior and our emotions in a very selfish, self-focused way. And if we can pivot, that is the beginning of empathy, where now we shift our focus. We focus on our behavior and her emotions. What am I doing and what is she feeling? What is my behavior and what is her reality? And when we shift that focus, we're less likely to feel resentment. We're less likely to go into shame. We're more likely to express empathy. And we're more likely to move away from those acting in behaviors towards the counterbalances and not project the acting in onto her safety-seeking behaviors and boundaries. And she's not avoiding intimacy. She's trying to rebuild her life, and she wants an intimate, authentic, intimate future with you. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.